Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Consultants Corner. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dov Horwitz to start things off today.
Good morning, everybody. As you know from the invites, we're doing another special segment today, our summary of the last few months, our first quarter of doing these Consultants Corner webinars. Before we go forward, just real quick, first of all, note, we talk every week about working closely with your regional security manager from CSI. So just be aware, we have Adam Barish, our regional security manager from Brooklyn on, Bill Hayes, our regional security manager from the Bronx and Westchester, and our producer of these webinars, Seth Goodstein, who works in Queens. And obviously everyone works together from the team, so you might even see each other at your location here and there. It happens. So that being said, we have got a lot to go through. We're not going to go as deep as we do in our regular sessions, but as you know, our webinars are always recorded, including this one. And we'll reference back that you should, if you have more questions on the topic we're covering, don't forget, you can always go back and watch that video or dig into the FAQs that can be found on our website. Without further ado, let's jump in. So we spent the first few weeks talking about where this whole webinar started from was understanding the procurement rules from DHSCS, how to navigate, whether it was your federal nonprofit security grant, or if it was the state hate crimes grant in New York State. Again, this is very New York centric. There could be other nuances and rules in other states. We can't speak for that. That being said, before you go too far, and before we get into the hardware, which we did the last few weeks, last few months of these webinars, we want to put together a quick checklist. Some of the most important things to help you really navigate. And as the team, the RSMs, your regional security manager, and us talk with locations, we keep seeing a lot of the first, out of the gate questions, the details needed to move forward with your grant. So we think if you maybe take a picture of this slide, note it down. These are the things that I think at this stage, if you've been someone who's been attending since the beginning, or if you're someone, this is your first one, it's a great place to start. These are some of the very important things to be aware of. So real quickly, who is your grant rep? We at CSI on this webinar do not speak for DHSCS. We can't give final answers on anything related to the grant. We can share our experience. We can share our knowledge, help you navigate, and more importantly, help you with a good security program. But when you have a real question, you got to know your rep and ask them, which grant do I have, right? Is it the federal nonprofit security grant? Or is it the state hate crimes grant? There's a lot of similarities, but there are nuances of the grant. And I think those of you who have attended have learned what some of those differences are, what, worry too much and dig too deep into. E-grants. This is where you manage your project. You have to do your quarterly progress reporting. So at the end of March, actually, anyone who has a grant will have a progress report to do within e-grants by the end of April. So don't forget that. It can be, I attend these webinars. I've met with my RSM. I've put my advertisement out. I did my EHP, maybe not in that order. But those are the things that go into it. And the state wants to see you moving forward. There's a lot to do with these projects. And if we wait to the last few months, it's going to be a scramble. We see it a lot. We'll always try to help. But the best is those of you who are attending this, moving it step by step, and it's just a much more efficient, effective, and less torturous process. We all know, now I'm at the fifth bullet, if you cannot move forward until your contract is executed, meaning it's signed by you and the state, and if you have a federal grant, the NSGP, is your EHP approved? We spent several sessions talking about how to do an EHP, an effective EHP. It's an important document. Obviously the requirements are for other reasons, for the environmental and historic needs, but it helps you really design and understand what you need in your project. We've talked about keeping notes, keeping records. Do you have a binder or some other good system to keep all your records? That's what the state is going to want to see if they visit you, if they audit you, whatever it may be. So it's not that hard. Print out your emails, the screenshots of the activity you do online. If you're, let's say, looking for an MWBE, the minority women-owned businesses, you want to keep records of that. So if you need to ask for any assistance or special circumstances. Do we have a project manager? We'll talk about this real briefly in a minute, but we've all learned there's a lot to this. To do it roughshod without a central cog is going to make it much harder. It doesn't mean they have to do every step of the project, but at least that centralized piece to keep the project flowing. Are we following the procurement rules? We'll point those out as we hit them throughout this slide. Obviously, the DHSCS reps will always tell you follow your contract, but this is very important. If you don't follow the rules, you won't be reimbursed. It happens, right? Because it's a reimbursement contract. You lay out the funds. If you're not following the rules, you won't be reimbursed. For example, Did we get 3 bids for every project? That is a rule. You need to get 3 bids. It is hard. We know vendors don't necessarily see our ads or respond to our ads, but you need to get those 3 bids. There's some unique situations where you can request special circumstances, but again, just each project. So if an access project, 3 bids. A door project, 3 bids. It's not just 3 bids. It's 3 bids for each project within your grant. Okay, hopefully this was the longest slide we spent on, and we'll go to the next. Take note of these, and it's definitely what you should have going forward. With that, I'll turn to Ilya to talk a little bit more about the project manager, which we spoke about a lot throughout our sessions.
Thank you. And I'll be brief here because, again, it's an overview. And so please remember, like Dov said, having somebody in a central role that doesn't necessarily have to do everything on the project, but a person who can hit any one of these 4 categories and then either delegate or ask for guidance or compile documentation or coordinate things, right? That would be a central individual who's managing this. We've seen time and time again, unfortunately, where people were pointing fingers at each other. Unfortunately, things were falling by the wayside, and maybe the EHPs weren't prepared, or maybe coordination with the DHS rep wasn't, I guess, as frequent or as comprehensive as it should have been. And therefore, lots of friction, lots of fortunate errors and omissions and just stumbling blocks. And, guess what happens on projects that have a lot of these things going on? It's unfortunately a lot of headaches. We're trying to incentivize you to think about this role of a project manager to help you reduce those headaches and get those projects done in an efficient manner. Of course, our team is here to help you, but listen, it all falls back to your own organization. And this is what we're trying to make a point of.
So this slide, some of you might remember, right? We used it as a summary when we finished going through all the procurement process of what you are required to do and what's part of your grant process, right? So you got awarded the grant, you sign your contract is kind of the next thing, right? What we call executing the contract. The next thing you require to do if you have a federal grant is your EHP. Again, we talked about that in the earlier weeks of this program. I think many of you are past that at this point, and we're waiting for your approval from FEMA. So in that waiting period, there's really not a lot you could do, but one of the big things you can do is create your RFP, right? Your request for proposal. This is the package that basically, when you get a bidder, a company who's interested in your project, what you send them so they can actually give you a legitimate, fair, clear bid that accomplishes the goals you want. Now, I'll say this: contract execution, EHP for federal grants are requirements. The RFP, like we proposed, is not a grant requirement, although the state does require you to have an RFP of some sort. We've realized over the years, right? This team, David Pollack, Ilya, myself, your RSMs have been doing this for now years. And we see a lot of the hiccups is when we don't design it right in the front end. We don't know what we, as meaning a location, don't know exactly what we want to accomplish with our projects. It's pain down the line. So we've really worked hard to put together these materials and help guide you so you can create an effective and thorough RFP. Everyone has a different temperature, how much materials you put together, work with your RSM. We spent several weeks on this, so definitely go back. It's probably the weeks in the session 7, 8, 9, plus or minus. I think all those sessions are titled online. The next thing you are required to do in pretty much all circumstances is make an advertisement before you seek your bidders, right? We've said likely people will not see your ad. There's a template we've shared in previous weeks. It's a template from DHS-CS. Share it with your RSM. We'll help distribute it. We can't refer any vendors, but we can help make sure this gets into the right hands so people can follow up with you. The next piece, we're still in 3 here, is the bid process. We've shown this kind of matrix to evaluate your bidders, the project, and all the important criteria. Again, this is a requirement from DHS-CS and should go into your records and notes. And then, right, through the bid, you start working with your vendors to do the installation. And we're not quite yet there, and we'll start talking about that in future weeks. But as we talked about the hardware stuff, you've realized, and we've gotten feedback from a lot of locations, now we know what we're asking for. We know what we're looking for. We know this vendor is full of it, right? We know this vendor is going to take care of us and knows what they're doing, right? So hopefully we're empowering all of you for effective startup and installations. Just real quick, I'm going to pop through here. The RFP package we talked about. Again, not a requirement. but the state wants you to have an RFP, a request for proposal of some sort. You can't just make the advertisement, a vendor writes back to you and you have nothing to share with them. Does it have to be exactly what we're proposing? Not necessarily, but we believe there is the most comprehensive way to do it. In every location, the RSMs will gauge your capabilities and how much you need based on your project to really put out there. So it's just these kind of documents are what we would share, and we've talked about in previous sessions. Many of you are moving forward. Your contract's executed. You probably submitted your EHP. Can we start finding vendors? Unfortunately, we're all the whole team's on calls with locations all the time, and there's still confusion about you can talk with the vendor, getting quotes on the front end. Before you get any really work with the vendor, an installer, whatever it may be, you need to have, for both projects, whether it's an NSGP, the federal NSGP, or the state hate crimes grant, you need to have your contract executed. No question. Don't move forward without that. And if you're an NSGP, your EHP has to be approved. So you're most likely, if you're a federal NSGP recipient, you're in that waiting period. Our best advice, confirm it with your DHSCS rep. Say, are we ready to go? Can we make our advertisement? Can we share our advertisement with potential bidders? Can we start scoring? This is where it starts. So before you do, don't be working with vendors. If you really need pricing help or guidance, that's where RSM can really help you and keep you out of a corner.
It's very important to have the mindset that even though you've prepared a lot of information about the project or several projects that you're trying to run, that the process of elaborating to the bidders and also asking them for information and also then reviewing what bids come back to you is still quite involved. It has a lot of steps. And so the most important feature that we have been supporting, and this is the reason why we suggest that you use a standardized set of documents and also standardized reply forms for bids, is because it simplifies the process of apples to apples comparison. Okay, if you cannot compare, let's say, a letter that says, we're going to install your system for $200,000, and then another one that says, well, let us show you the breakdown of how unit prices stack up and what our labor rates are, and then you have a lump sum on the other hand, right? You can't do apples to apples comparisons. So that's very obvious. So we want you to see documentation in bids that comes back to you that is relatively similar, right? In terms of the depth of information you're going to be reviewing. Okay. But the second bullet here and the sub bullets right under it is really, again, it speaks to the process of there's a quantitative way of reviewing bids, like basically labor rates, unit prices, and the final price, the total price for the project. But also we know that contractors also run on all cylinders. And many of them will tell you that I have 15 projects going on. I have like 15 bids that I'm putting out, right? So they're also very busy, rightfully so. However, you want to monitor completeness of their documentation, accuracy, clarity, their communication style with you. So those things tell you a good story in advance of what level of attention you're likely to receive from this bidder should they be chosen to work on your project. Okay, it's not just about the numbers. Okay, it's also that qualitative side. How are they attending meetings? What did they ask you? Okay, did they even take notes? Right? So those things are also important. But this list is self-explanatory. Please, nothing else, review these bullet points and just help yourselves to manage this process a little bit more comprehensively. That's all.
Right. One week we had an example on here showing a weak bid. It just said prices and very limited information. How do we make a sufficient and effective decision based on that? It's just inappropriate. So we want to stay ahead of that. All right, real quickly, the requirements for the minority woman-owned business enterprise. This is a requirement for the New York State Securing Communities Against Hate Crimes grants. It is a requirement. 30% of your entire project, which is 50,000, must be allocated towards an MWBE, and you must do it first. In previous years, the state wasn't as strict, and locations would do their first, let's say, 35 grand on other projects, and then they couldn't find an MWBE for the remaining project. Guess what? They were not reimbursed. They did not get their money back. They had to eat the money they spent on their first project. So now the state is stricter. So if you don't have the slides available, if you're a hate crimes grant recipient, ask your RSM. We can share this link. Maybe Seth, if we can pop that into the chat, That's where you'll find the details on slides 18 to 46 of their webinar. After Passover, after Pesach, we will do our own MWBE presentation. It was just too early. It would just confuse everyone if we did this earlier on in the process. Now that you're advertising, the first thing we need to do is get MWBEs. So we will talk more about that, but just don't get ahead of yourselves. If you have the hate crimes grant, you need to start with, once you're advertised, the next step is MWBE. All right, now let's get into the fun hardware stuff.
Okay, so we'll try to move through this as quickly as we can, but again, there's no expectation because many of you, if you've attended previous sessions or if you choose to review previous sessions, you'll still have access to a lot of this information. We just try to make it a little bit more concise. Okay, so doors and door hardware. Okay, remember this photo, right? I was extremely deliberate about putting this photo as the starting slide of doors and door hardware. You will see, and I think it's very symbolic, that you see a small door and a huge glass wall. Okay, because the doors may not be your significant feature that needs to be protected first. So you always have to look at your facility and evaluate it and look at it from the perspective of a threat actor. And if you don't know how to do that, ask the RSMs. They're there to work with you, right? And to think about, okay, well, how do I prioritize my projects? Okay, what should my thinking be? How do I sequence these things? Because as we said to you before, it's difficult enough to run a single project. For, let's say you're doing door upgrades or you're doing windows, right? But it's even more difficult to run several projects at the same time. Talk about, we are still at the point where some facilities don't even have project managers. Okay, please remember, okay, easy does it, but you do have to be very prudent. Okay, so moving right along, we did demonstrate to you that even a simple thing that this photo that you see in front of yourself, in front of you, you've seen this multiple times. Okay, you walk by, I don't know, a strip mall, or if you go to some government offices, you see installations like this all over the place, right? Now, even such an installation has a lot of exclusive terminology around it. And these boxes here, they show you this exclusive terminology. Should you begin learning what that is? Yeah, probably if you have to do door upgrades, or if you're managing that project or are a stakeholder in your facility, for sure, you have to start kind of understanding what those things mean. Because when they come back to you in a proposal, that's what the verbiage that the vendors will use. Okay, so those things are very important. However, if we jump to the next slide, you will see that the same things are also your vulnerabilities. So you always have to look at the type of door that you're dealing with, what kind of materials are being used, right? And kind of be able to point a finger and discuss your vulnerabilities with the vendor, because guess what? Some vendors don't know security at all. Even though they're saying, yeah, I'll install a door for you, they don't understand security. Right? And so you shouldn't expect that they will come with all the knowledge that you don't have, that you're lacking. Okay, so please make sure that you have learned a thing or two, and coordinate with the RSMs and make sure that you point out the vulnerabilities that you believe exist. Unless you also had like a report recently done by someone or an RSM helped you develop some direction, right? So please remember that these things are should be somewhere in your vocabulary. We're trying to reduce that, this exclusivity of language, but it is what it is, unfortunately. We also covered the 3 door types. Your storefront aluminum doors, it's a hard no if you are in need of a new door or if you're replacing doors. From our perspective, do not use storefront aluminum doors, okay? Because they typically come with huge glass panels. Aluminum is a very pliable metal, so it doesn't withstand attacks with hardware tools or a blast. And of course, again, it's if you install something of that sort, It's very difficult to reinforce, and it's also sometimes a cause for false sense of security. The other two door types, solid wood and hollow metal doors, while better by majority of their features, sometimes they also arrive with elements like glass that still needs additional protection. So don't just think that if somebody is specking out a door for you and says, oh yeah, we're going to put a solid wood door, you're good. You have to take a look at what the frame looks like, how sturdy is it, what other materials are being used on this door. Because both these types of doors, the reason why we have question marks for each of them is because they have a lot of glass around them. Okay, so don't just stop and receive a bid from someone, or somebody walks around your facility and says, we're going to do hollow metal doors. Well, ask more questions. Let them give you some maybe elevation designs or photographs of what they think is going to work for you, and then make up your mind.
Ilya, if I may, for
Please.
those of you who have been with us for the last few sessions, we started talking about the puzzle, right? To do this, a comprehensive installation to really upgrade security levels, it's all the pieces like Ilya was just showing you around the door, and even thinking about the better types of doors, what gets us there. We're seeing a lot of locations where, yeah, maybe they put that security film on those big glass panels of their, storefront doors, but they forgot all the other pieces. So therefore, it still isn't providing that comprehensive protection. And that's really the message we want to drill down there, is think the whole picture. And obviously, if it's a lot of glass, it makes it that much harder to bring to the standards we're looking for.
Perfect. Thanks, Dov. So then moving on, again, it's funny, Dov just mentioned the word puzzle, right? Because if you think of a door, what you just saw on the previous slide, well, it has locks and it has hinges and it has other elements like door closers and potentially pinned hinges, which are some additional security measures, right? So everything here from left to right are those features that, however subtle they may be, you should be looking out for them, because those are your standard security features for your doors. So we're not asking you to learn all of the exclusive terminology, but those are simple terms that you can record. Go back to this webinar or go back to our previous sessions on door hardware. Take a look at CBR Architectural webinar. They featured a lot of the same stuff, right? And just remember or try to make records of what it is that you're looking for. What are some of the basics? You can even take a copy of the slide and give it to the vendors and tell them, don't come back to me without those things being checked.
It's a good idea.
We also talked about how there are two types of locks. Some of them are simply mechanical locks, and then there are electromechanical locks. So, and then there are just simply electric locks. So, for example, a strike is an electromechanical lock, right? There's a mechanical movable piece, and it also works on electrical current, right? There's a electromagnetic lock, right? So a magnet, right? Not the best solution. Doesn't work in all circumstances, can be circumvented, very much dependent on holding force and workmanship and quality of installation. Also, it's one of the few solutions that is nearly in all cases fail safe. So if electricity is cut to that lock, the door is open. Then there's a Mortise lock, and Mortise is the one that we would recommend more than any other. However, it obviously doesn't work in all circumstances. So please remember that you still have to work with the vendor and understand what fits at different parts of your facility around the perimeter and on the interior. And last but not least, cylindrical locks, just a no. Very simple. And one of my favorite slides. I've heard multiple times now that we've been doing these sessions over the last few months, is that some folks, they say, well, we're just going to do it ourselves. Okay, we're going to do we're going to specify everything. Well, this is what vendors give to prospective clients to specify locking for themselves. Okay, if you can figure this out, please come back to us. We want to maybe pick your brain, okay? And maybe that'll help us to get to be better and to communicate with the rest of the community. But in general, Door hardware consultants can read this. Folks without special knowledge, special education, probably won't be able to do a good job. So I want to caution you, when you are specifying or looking to purchase locks, they have multiple models and model numbers, even though a lock may look exactly the same. But unfortunately, it'll have a lot of these subtle features. And each of those features is represented by a different model number. Okay, so please remember that it's not so easy to just go and say, I want this one. Unfortunately, you have to be a lot more detailed and ask for professional help to guide you. Now, we're getting closer to the question that Dov raised multiple times. Actually, a lot of people in our conversations have raised multiple times, is that there is security and then there is code compliance. Okay, and so we simply offered this standard phrase that can be included in any RFP letter, introductory documentation, right? Whenever you're dealing with doors or other features that must meet code in your facility, right? Any other security upgrades, please include this phrase. It's a catch-all and it'll help you avoid liability or a failed fire inspection. Okay, so those two things are significant and they can affect your operations negatively. And so this is a good phrase to share with the vendors and say, please make sure that you get me better security, but you also have to meet code. And there's, I think, another slide. But before we get to that code, that another repetition of code compliance, these are some of the basic things to look out for. Okay. Again, some of these things are they're not quantitative, they're qualitative. If you see that a contractor is not showing good workmanship, if they're leaving the site messy, if they're not if you see gaps in the units that are installed, right? Something that just looks amiss or doesn't work well, right? Make sure that you pay attention to those things. You shouldn't be taking over this project as being complete without pointing those things out and making sure that the vendor has fixed those things. That's what the defect rectification period is for, right? You do the final inspection or several inspections before you make the final payment to the vendor, and also before you can comfortably take over the installation. Okay, but there are several other things. So overall workmanship, desired functionality. Again, as I said, handover for beneficial use is important. Warranty is often missed in a lot of contracts. And so for a lot of stuff, the warranty is typically 1 year. But what do you get with that? For different types of products, the warranty service and what is included in the warranty is different. So make sure you understand what's entailed whatever your upgrades are, particularly door hardware. And of course, extended maintenance. It's the difference between you having prepaid or paying, let's say, a fixed sum for extended maintenance versus suddenly having to take something from your capital budget that you didn't anticipate and having to pay it for unanticipated upgrades or unanticipated repairs. So extended maintenance is something you should be considering as well. Again, very briefly, those are the basic things without using exclusive terminology that a lot of vendors like to use. Those are the things you should look out for when door hardware and doors are installed at your facilities. Okay, they're very, very simple, but they're clear signs that the vendor has done something wrong. Okay, and so make sure that even in your RFP, that there is clear language to the vendors that if this doesn't meet clients' acceptance or client standards, you will have to make repairs before handover. So these things are something easy to look out for. Dov, why don't I throw this back to you, because you've chased down this collage from our friends. I think it's Securitech, if I recall, and why don't you cover that one?
Sure. Look, well, any installation we do, we care. Obviously, we're trying to upgrade our security levels, prevent the bad guy from getting in, ensuring we can protect our congregants and students. But the reality is that we have to be cognizant of code, which includes fire egress, other school requirements with young children on site. Code comes first. There has been, since the whole active shooter threat and lockdown response has kind of proliferated, lots of companies have come up with little types of tools that can very effectively, I'm not saying these aren't effective tools and methods to secure your door, but they are 100% not to code. We have heard many instances. Look, every jurisdiction is a little bit different. Where you are, and you have multiple agencies that oversee you, from Department of Education to the fire marshals or whatever it may be. But and obviously many of these are actually against even ADA compliance. So just be mindful. Just because they're on the market doesn't mean that they are to code and are meant for your type of institution. And the answer is not that. Well, what do we do? We've talked about how we harden doors, how we create locking that complies with code and gives us the right level of forced entry protection. So any of these things, unfortunately, if you're working with a legitimate security professional, that's their job, is to balance the need to protect you appropriately, ensure effective operations for your organization's needs, and comply with code. It's that mix that makes the job. It's not just, we could fill a door up with cement and block it off. No one will get in, but obviously it doesn't work. So let's just be mindful. It's worth being very aware. Code comes first. Single motion egress, that push bar that you can always get out, a handle that everyone knows how to work. If it's some sort of confusing system, that's a fail, because it's going to be hard to utilize during an emergency. Before we do jump to the next slide, though, I want to add a caveat to something that we've noticed a lot. A lot of organizations, whether it's their door installation or anything, well, DHSES approved this. I want to make an important distinction. Your DHSES rep is not a security professional. They're grant representatives. They're there to ensure you follow the procurement rules. The procurement rules of getting bids, looking at the vendors, puts the onus on you to ensure your installation is to code, your installation does what you want, your installation is realistic security. They're not saying that this vendor or this product or anything is doing the job, is good security or not. They are saying you follow the procurement rules, you follow the process, and you get reimbursed. They have no idea what camera versus another camera is good, what door hardware versus another door hardware is good. So just be mindful of that. They're not approving the project. They're approving that you follow the process. Next slide, please. Importantly, we're talking about these door upgrades, and obviously we can talk about access control in a moment. And we always say, well, how do we use electronic access control on Shabbos if that's our type of location's concern? There are many ways to do both, right? That door can remain secured. At a minimum, even if you can't use electronic access control on Shabbos, let's minimize the amount of times that the door is open. And then there are tools out there that will easily function between electronic during the weekday and some sort of manual cipher code on Shabbos and holidays. Be mindful that cipher punch codes, any type of keypads, is really, really not an ideal setup for a real security situation. Codes can get shared. The codes can be you can tell from what's been pressed. People put the little lettering on the side. We've seen it all. Do not rely on this as their go-to. But if your limitation is Shabbos, it's an option to at least not have a door wide open. A security guard who screens everyone before they come in is another way. Keep the door closed before people come in. So just be aware there are obviously ways to do both. We can have secure, hardened doors and protect us on Shabbos when we can't use electronics.
So as we often do, and I think that this has been very useful for the community, we have to summarize these things, okay? And the best way to summarize it is to say, okay, well, what are some of the general basic rules that you should be thinking about without working through very, again, exclusive language, exclusive terminology? What should you be focused on when you're thinking about door hardware upgrades, right? And so there you have it. We've put together for you some very basic things that you can certainly share with vendors and tell them, well, these are the things that will should work in general for me. Obviously, again, go back to being code compliant, and of course, code compliance is necessary. But these are the general conditions that you should be putting in front of vendors for them to be mindful that they shouldn't be just proposing what they think is right. These are proven controls that help reduce vulnerability, because guess when we see those vulnerabilities is when some of these facilities get these upgrades, and then we come back and do another assessment. And then when we come back, we notice some failures and some vulnerabilities which didn't need to exist in the first place, because unfortunately people at that facility didn't either heed our message or they just didn't have enough awareness. Okay, so we're hoping to make this as simple and as straightforward as possible. Okay, and then another set of things that you should be mindful of. Okay, I'm not going to read all of them, but again, code compliance is absolutely necessary, right? Walls around the door should be no less sturdy. Okay, that is particularly interesting in light of recent incidents. I don't know if you've been monitoring media, but Dov has been very much on top of that. He's been sending a lot of these materials to the team. In recent weeks, not even months, there have been incidents where a vehicle just literally rams through a wall, crashes through a perimeter wall of a building, only to find out that the wall is built out of like the very shoddy materials. Okay, and literally just goes through what used to look like a brick wall, and it turned out to be not a brick wall at all, just some very light materials. Okay, so you have to work with your vendors whenever there are upgrades around your facility, even if it's not a door. Make sure that you're looking for sturdy materials that will be around your perimeter entrances. Okay, and of course, like I said, quality installation and maintenance are absolutely important. Some things fail very quickly, and particularly door hardware if it's not well maintained. And so, sure, you've installed it, you've paid the money, but then you don't maintain it. Let's say you don't touch it for a year. After a year, things will deteriorate, even before then, right? So please remember that a lot of things that you're buying, they require maintenance on a continuous basis. Over to you.
Yeah, I'm gonna be real brief. Remember the puzzle. It's not just the door. It's not just the lock. So whether it's the hardware project or any other project, just remember the pieces to make the complete puzzle. Let's keep rocking.
Windows and glass. So we talked about this. There are two kind of schools of thought or major pathways that you would have to consider of how you would be protecting your windows. One is blast protection and shatter resistance. Another one is bullet protection, bullet resistance, okay? And so reinforcement of glass is going to be different and follow slightly different standards for blast protection versus bullet resistance, okay? So please remember that when you say, oh, I want it to be bullet resistant, that doesn't mean that it will also be blast resistant, and vice versa. If you're reinforcing windows for against blast, don't expect them to be reinforced against gunfire. So again, I can't avoid taking you back to details. Okay, if somebody comes to you and says, yeah, we can install window film, right? And window film is a very familiar two words that are used in the community, right? Because there are a lot of vendors that are walking around and saying, I can sell you window film. And how many times has our team seen when window film is installed, it's all great, it looks, seems like clean installation, and unfortunately it has no anchoring system. And when it doesn't have an anchoring system, guess what happens? The entire plate of glass flies inside your facility. It doesn't withstand anything, doesn't even withstand a kick, okay? And so what you see in front of you, particularly in the center photo, is how to properly seal window film that is installed in order to reinforce a glass pane. Okay, and then to the right, you see some standards that apply to installation of window film and glass protection. Okay, and again, you can go back for more details to our previously recorded sessions. Workmanship and I guess quality of materials and how the vendors operate on site is a telltale sign of whether you're getting good or bad service, or whether you're going to end up with good, reliable protection, or is it going to add to your full sense of security. Unfortunately, we understand the reality of your operations. You have to wear many hats, okay? And on most days, the security hat is not on. And for a good reason, because you have to run multiple other programs, you have to take care of some other capital expenses around your facility, some other upgrades, IT, maybe building out different rooms, or maybe knocking down walls and expanding some spaces. Completely respect that, we understand. But this is when a good project manager might come in handy, and just to follow through and keep bugging the contractors to make sure that they follow good workmanship rules and get you the right quality of installation. Again, without diving into too many details, all right, the main standard that governs bullet resistance is Underwriters Laboratories standard number 752. And obviously it has its own levels, okay? And so please reach out to the RSMs. Please ask questions about what level of protection, if you are looking for bullet resistant, I guess, implementation, materials, what level of protection will this particular material meet? And there are sometimes labels that are fixed on those materials, and more importantly, you have to ask for letters of certification from contractors who are trying to sell you bullet resistant materials. Okay, and they have to, on those letters of certification, they have to state what level of UL 752 their materials comply with, right? Because as you can see, level 2 is different from level 1. Level 6 is different from level 4, right? So please remember, and in these particular situations, I would strongly recommend that you speak with professionals, because just to say, I just want bullet resistant materials, right? Well, you don't even know what level you're buying, right? So just remember that it all has to be aligned with the level of threat and the history of the types of weapons that are being used. Okay, so if you're a school, you'll have a different threat level, regardless of, you know, if it's a faith-based school, whatever it may be. If you're a religious institution and you primarily cater to a congregation, adult population, different threat level. It's a different scenarios that apply to you. So please remember that you have to work that out with, preferably with your RSM.
As we transition to the next slide, I just want to add in, anyone in our sessions should be aware that there really, if any vendor ever comes to you and uses the words bulletproof, there really isn't such a thing. Everything's about its resistance. At a certain time, at a certain caliber, at a certain effort, they will get through. And that's why we build layers. That's why none of these projects are standalone projects, right? While they're breaking through the front, are we escaping out the back? Are we locking ourselves in a secure room behind secure doors? So just think about all that stuff. It's about buying time, but nothing, stay away from the words bulletproof, or if you hear vendors saying bulletproof.
And also please remember that if you install bullet resistant materials in your windows, it doesn't mean that they will withstand a serious blast wave, because they're not cross-tested. Very rarely they are. Okay, so please remember that if you're looking for blast resistance, that would be subject to different standards, different applications, and different vendors will be using different materials. Okay, so make sure you follow through on that. Access control.
You can hit the next one too. Look, I've always said access control is my favorite piece of the security puzzle. I mean, it's not just the swipes, it's not just the locks, what we think of. There's so much more goes through it. This is a slide taken exactly from a previous session. I won't go through it all, but just remember, our goal is to keep out those who don't belong, make it easy and seamless for those who are authorized and screened to get through, right? If I'm an employee, but it takes everybody, and it takes a real thinking from the front end, right? From your operations to training to your plans and policies, that all goes in together for a comprehensive access control program. So, right, obviously the grant pays for the electronics, the brains, the wiring, the cabling, the swipes, the cards, etc. And the visitor management, maybe the video recording screen, but it doesn't help you with the thinking. How do we design it right? This is something, partner with your RSMs. If needed, they'll bring us in. It's an integral part to do it right. You do it wrong, people bypass it, people turn it off, and you actually have nothing. So let's be mindful of all the pieces that go into this. Similarly, for the next slide, you got to sit down on the front end. You got to think about with your team about who is authorized, when they're authorized, if they are someone who's allowed in, how do they get in, right? It's not just swipe. Well, maybe they get in that door, but not that door, and at this time and not that time, right? If we have services, how do we deal with visitors, known visitors, unknown? What authorizes them to get in? Oh, I know Ilya. I come to pray here, and I know Ilya. Oh, okay, he'll verify you. Again, it's similarly to how Ilya ended the glass segment. It's based on our threat. We have to be mindful. We want to be warm and welcoming, but what is that appropriate measure for our institution, for visitors, for who gets access and how? And of course, special events too. We do have a template for building policies and procedures on the JCRC website. If needed, please reach out to your RSM. We'll make sure they have that available for you. It might be a little dated at this point, but the concept's there. Get together, sit down and think about these things so that you can actually install. It will dictate your hardware. It will dictate how you design it once you realize, well, that actually won't work for us. So, for example, a Shabbos consideration, if you have special events a lot on your site, you can't get all the guests incoming swipe code. So you have to think about it from the front end. Thank you.
On this note, I'm mindful of the time, Dov. I think we're at the right juncture to get into Q&A. We do have a few slides that we've prepared just to be safe here, because to fill up this overview. But I think we can plan to show the rest of the slides during the next session. So why don't we jump to Q&A? Unless you want to finish up with the rest.
I haven't seen too many questions to the public, unless Adam, if you've seen, but I think maybe we can do one or two more access control slides and take the 2 or 3 questions that I see.
No worries. Let's just jump to the next one. And very, very quickly, again, there are 2 types of access control. You're talking about simple access control, and that's mechanical locks, right? Keys, or it's going to be automated access control, which works with RFID cards or other types of credentials, or an NFC protocol that works off of your mobile devices. Basically, it is a credential reader that you see on the picture on the right, intercom systems that give you audio and video communication, so that you have remote access capability or remote control capability for doors. And it keeps, like Dov said, keeps the people who are unauthorized out of your facility, okay? And at the very minimum, it delays access by the threat actor. What's involved? A lot of stuff is involved, right? I can stop right there, okay? Just look at this photo. It's not simple. Whenever you say, I want an access control system, sure, there are 2 types of vendors. One that will sell you a big wagon full of things. We'll call them bells and whistles, and they'll look very nice. And they'll also sit somewhere in a closet, and you will not understand how they work, and they probably oversell you 10 times, okay? And then there are vendors that will say, well, wait a second. What kind of a user are you? How are you gonna, like to Dov's point, right? What kind of policies do you already use? If you have no policies, if you don't have basic protocols for how you want to manage access control, then why are you rushing to get an electronic access control system, right? Maybe that will incentivize you to align with, and develop some protocols, but please remember that this goes hand in hand. You can't have electronic systems without developing good processes, okay? So If you can use that incentive, if you can use that nudge, then a lot of the stuff that you see on your screen is for you. But if you're not ready, or if you've had challenges with your previous access control installations, for example, a telltale sign is alarm systems that are turned off, access control readers that are not working, locks that electromechanical locks that are turned off, or they're broken or they're malfunctioning. Some of the hardware, and I said to you, right? All you need to do is just to run your finger on top of any devices that are sitting in your security closet to understand whether you're taking good care of your access control system, whether you understand how it works. Okay, and if there's a layer of dust on that system, you're not ready. Sorry, you didn't install it right and you don't maintain it correctly. Okay, so again, this is just to let you know that this is not as simple as just saying, I just throw some readers at it, right? Because there's a lot of stuff in the background that supports the operation of what you see every day. These are the key features. I'm not going to go through all of them. If you want, please talk to your RSM, right? They're going to be able to walk you through how these things work, give you some vendors, not even vendors, sorry, manufacturers that operate in the space, and those that can give you further demonstrations and even arrive at your facility and give you some pilot tests and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff that's available, and we like electronic access control. It does create that distance, time and distance are the two key features of good protection, good security. So the farther away the threat actor is, the more time it takes them to get through to your facility from the perimeter or from the outside, right? The better off you are. The more time you have to make decisions. And access control, that's the electronic access control in particular, helps you do that. Okay, this is again to repeat what we said in the beginning. Project manager, project manager, project manager. For access control, for anything electronic, even door hardware, even Windows, whatever, you have to have someone who's dedicated to run this. We're happy to take more questions on that, right? And of course, all of these things require continual learning. Why do you think we're recording so many webinars? Okay, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you think that we're running a college here, you're very far from it, because we can expand on every single one of the webinars for another 3 to 4 hours, even longer. Okay,
special request, we'll do it.
Yeah, exactly. So it requires a lot of thinking, alignment with your operations, developing policies and procedures, getting agreement from your stakeholders, and also getting your regular population groups to comply with the way you want to operate your access, right? If they don't comply, if you traditionally see that people just walk all over the place and just don't ignore all security features, you have a different problem. It cannot be solved with electronic access control, okay? You have a behavioral problem. So until you've solved the behavioral problem, it's difficult to implement electronic access and hope that everything will work out, okay? So again, please come back to us, ask us more questions. General rules: learn and plan first. Okay, like we said, if you don't understand the product, why are you buying it? You wouldn't be able to justify it. Let's say you're buying something for your home. You want to buy a fridge, but you don't know how it works. You know nothing about it. You don't understand the brand. You don't understand how it plugs in, how long it's going to work for, what kind of features it has. Would you buy a fridge like that? Of course not. You would want to learn a little bit more how it fits your needs, right? The same with these systems. Okay, focus on ease of use. I cannot stress this enough. And probably for me, I'll leave it at that. I'll just focus on that second bullet. And I have to reiterate, if it's not easy to use, do not buy it. And I'm even happy to spend a couple of seconds just to be quiet so that you feel that it's one of the most important pieces here. Okay, now, do we want to go through these, or do we want to open this up for questions?
Let's make sure we're open for questions. I'm impressed that we did get through that in the hour. So thank you everyone for bearing with us. I think we have Adam Barish for maybe a few more minutes, and then Bill Hayes to help through Q&A, but I didn't see too many questions up, but sometimes I don't see it all. Adam, if you're up, but we can also take some of these FAQs while we wait.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Apologies, I'm gonna have to jump off soon, but our first question: the NSGP requires you to have a procurement policy Most small congregations do not have one, but we do now. Does JCRC-NY provide procurement policy templates?
Gotcha. Well, the answer is we have a lot of stuff in development. That's not one that we have available that I'm aware of, but you should base that off of, honestly, what's in your contract with DHSES, the presentations that they share with you for how to do the procurement rules, that we are going to do this. We're going to make sure the contract's executed, advertised, solicit 3 bids per project, state it out. All the stuff that we know you have to do can suffice as a policy. Like many of the stuff, we don't have to overwhelm it.
Thank you. Next question is, please address if you think we should record visitors.
Like in a regular situation for access control when you have visitors. What do you mean by record? Like with the video, do we know, or just write down?
It was during the access control.
Well, I gotcha. I'll jump in first there. I think the answer is, like we've been saying for the last few slides, it's based on our threat. It's based on the situation. You definitely should always screen in some degree. Does every location need a check versus ID? Do we always expect a visitor list? There's multiple methods to do. If you want to know everyone who's in your building, yeah, of course, it's an ideal situation, but we have to recognize who we are and what our threat level is. But whatever the case is, there should be some sort of policy. This is that sitting around the table and thinking about, what goes into our access policy. It could be a tool. You have to decide what your appetite is and think about it from the front end. Elia, anything to add on that?
Let's leave it there. That's fine. If you have any further questions on that, just come back to us.
Okay, the last one I see here is referring to the slide with bullet resistant glass UL 752, UL rating 8, shows a shotgun, not a 7.62 assault rifle. A picture of AK-47 should work here. Moreover, there is an AR-10 on level 5.
I think that is beyond the scope.
Are we hearing that whatever that information is, that it is inaccurate?
It was inaccurate, right? That's what the question was stating, or the comment.
This was taken directly from the source. These standards do tend to go through updates. I right now cannot tell you who's right or who's wrong, but if you want to follow up with us, we'll get you the right information.
Gotcha. All right. Wow.
That's all I have for now.
Look at that. Ilya, kudos. Team, kudos. If anyone wants to stick around, we'll let Adam jump.
I have a question.
Yeah, Seth, please.
So for Ilya or Dov, however you want to answer it, it's kind of a door technical question. What's the difference between, when you talk about an electrified lock, when you're dealing with a panic push bar and as a crash bar, as opposed to having just an electrified latch and not having a magnet, how does that electrified crash bar work? Does it send the electricity to the push bar itself to allow it to be pressed in, or is it always able to be used in an emergency mode to get out? Any idea how? I mean, maybe it's beyond the scope, but just curious as to how that would actually function.
So on the secure side, so again, a crash bar can be used in combination with different types of locks. So you can have a rim lock, you can have a vertical rod device. I believe there's a Mortise installation as well. So depending on the type of lock you'll be using, the exit to the point of code compliance is always no knowledge, right? So you push it, you have to get out, right? So there is no, how shall I say, electrified barrier, if you will, to egress. But when you're on the non-secure side, on the public side, right, that is when the, and if it's a normal operation, that is when the locking equipment is electrified, and it will be released if you're presenting unauthorized credential. Now, each of those locks, vertical rod has electrified version, and it could be, it's called retractable vertical rod, so it could retract when you present a credential. It could work in combination with a strike at the top if it's a half vertical rod. And so it really depends on the type of code compliant fire rated locking that you're using, and how it will operate both for egress, which is easier because you must egress. So the operation is typically mechanical, but for access, it will operate depending on the design of that lock. So in other words, the crash bar itself is not, it's just one of the pieces of the locking hardware, but it's not the lock itself. It's just a glorified lever. That's all it is.
So essentially, when you're looking for egress on a crash bar, it's operating mechanically with no electronic access at that point to get out. And then going in would be where that's when the electronic access control would come into play.
You can set up operations where where there's a feature that's called delayed egress. And it's done with crash bars that are electrified, but it's a specialized application. So I haven't seen a fit for purpose for facilities that we have in our community. So yeah.
I think maybe to clarify, Ilya, I think, is this what you're asking about, Seth? There are certain crash bars that don't have the actual mechanical push piece that when there's contact, when you touch it, that it will, for egress, unlock the latch just based on sensory. Is that what you're kind of asking about?
No, he was on point with the mechanical aspect. No, I was looking, not the ones that electronically or with a motion sensor, nothing with a magnet lock, completely electrified and with that mechanical aspect afterwards, which leads me to another question. When you're looking at lever locks on exterior perimeter secondary doors, for instance, when you have that lever, now you could have a lever handle that's with a mortise lock, correct? That's not a cylindrical lock. So it might look the same as a cylindrical lock. However, if it's with an effective grade 1 ANSI level high security mortise lock, you're not dealing with the same vulnerabilities that you would have with a cylindrical lever handle.
If I recall correctly, Carol Racina in her webinar made a very clear distinction of how to tell whether a door is equipped with a cylindrical lock versus a mortise lock. If you go back to that recording, you will notice how a mortise will always have a key cylinder that's below the lever handle. And so, because that's the body of the mortise itself is like a square piece almost, or a rectangular piece that's inserted into a door. So the key cylinder will always sit a few inches below the door handle, a door lever, right? And on a cylindrical lock, you will have the key cylinder inside the handle itself. Okay, so when you approach a door, and if you're looking at that, you can tell right then. But the easiest way to tell is just to open the door a little bit, and you'll see exactly. So it's very plain to see mortise versus cylindrical.
So, any more, Seth?
I can go on forever, but
I know. Trust us, we know. But there is a question. There's a new question on, if you want to do the Q&A for us on the chat.
I got one.
Oh, there's Bill.
Yeah. Very commonly asked question, and I'm glad somebody brought it up. How do we choose between blast proof versus bulletproof film? Well, we'll start off by kind of defining what those things mean, because there's really no such thing as bulletproof. And I'll let you guys take it from there. And it's really a decision of objectives and budget, but I'm going to let you guys carry it on from there.
Objectives, budget, and threat, the level of threat. But
Right.
Also, there is no bulletproof film. If those three words are used in a proposal from a vendor, run. Okay? Bulletproof film does not exist. Okay? I want you to come back to this recording and just repeat with us afterwards. Okay? Bulletproof film does not exist. There is no such thing. Okay? The materials that go in to make bulletproof pane, right? They're very thick. It has nothing to do with a slim coat that protects you from the elements, the storm fill or shatter resistant fill. Okay, so the choices that you'll be making are dependent primarily on the level of threat, right? Are you dealing with scenarios that are likely to bring about gunfire? Or are you dealing with scenarios that are likely to have forced entry or a blast, right? So forced entry and blast, that's where you apply the film. For gunfire, completely different. Even the door will feel a lot heavier. Even the door itself will have to be bullet resistant, not just glass pieces or plexiglass in that case. So if you need more information, I believe, and again, please don't quote me, this is something that we might want to check with David Pollock from the JCRC team. There is a new guide that is either under development, it's like a draft that's been drafted for the JCRC team that sets a few additional explanations and standards that help you understand how to make your choices.
And yeah, keep your proof for your whiskey. But let's just recognize that even, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ilya, let's say we do a blast resistant film or security rated film for our most likely threat for the type of institutions here, for someone trying to, for forced entry, trying to break through. Even if someone shoots through it, the pane, the glass that you have laminated now with this film will stay together. It'll make it that much harder for them to, that forced entry includes them shooting it and then trying to kick through and kick all the glass out. So in that situation, if anyone's targeting you with gunfire, unfortunately, obviously move deeper within your facility, but they won't be able to just easily now kick the whole pane out because they shot through it a few times. Remember, everything's about resistance. Even bullet resistant glass, which obviously has a higher level of security, eventually will be defeated. Eventually, anything can be defeated with enough time and resources. And that's why part of the big plan is getting cops there quickly. So you got to be able to communicate to law enforcement to respond. You got to be able to move deeper within your facility and provide additional layers and barriers. But so even if the glass isn't bullet resistant, it still will prevent it with this security laminate, with this film, from being shattered and broken through.
I just wanted to add, so some of the things that we're seeing, and Bill will concur with this, and I know Dov and Ilya will concur because they've been seeing our reports when we're doing them. A lot of installations of security film that we see is done improperly. And I know we've mentioned this before, but it bears to reiterate. It's very important that it's done correctly. If you need those specs, we could show you, we could send you, the preliminary information as to what you should be asking for from those vendors, and we could, reach out to your RSM. We're happy to send it. But the biggest thing is anchoring and making sure that it's properly attached with the correct attachment system from the manufacturer as per the specifications of that actual window film. Whatever the actual the product is, the manufacturer, they're following those manufacturers' recommendations. Why? We're seeing a lot that are not anchored to the frame. So what's going to happen in a blast, potentially, the entire glass will be blown in one piece. And even when you're talking about forced entry, the entire piece of glass will go in one piece. And I like to direct people to the Capitol riots and the insurrection on January 6th, when you see them using the police officer's shield, the rioters, to break in through the windows, and you see the piece of glass go in like one sheet together. That tells us a couple things. One is the frames weren't able to support it, and or it was not anchored properly, and it's important. Eventually, like Dov said, it's going to fail. The idea is to give you time from when the incident happens to when law enforcement gets there, and the more time you have to shelter in place to be able to do so. So these are the things to look for. It shouldn't be an option. It should be something that comes inclusive with your installation of that window film. It shouldn't be, well, you have to pay an X more if you want the option of having it anchored, and it should be inclusive. So any questions on that, please let us know. Sometimes, they'll come one day, they'll put on the film. Generally, they won't anchor it the same day. You need some time for the bubbles to come out. and the water to come out and make sure that it adheres properly, and then they should come back and be able to anchor that. So we don't want you to get a false sense of security. I've seen institutions that have it applied, they feel they're secure, but when the reality of the situation is that if something does occur, it's not going to give them the protection that they think they're going to get.
The other thing to think about is, and I think David mentioned it during previous webinars, and I think several other colleagues on the team mentioned it. There's a big difference between contractors. Like sometimes it's like a huge gap. Okay, some contractors, right, they represent solid products. They are factory certified and trained, and they go for recertification very frequently because products get upgraded. Guess what, right? So they have to keep up with their knowledge. They have to go back and spend extra hours to train, to understand, what adhesive are we using, right? Maybe they upgraded the adhesive. Maybe the anchoring system got a slight bump, right, in the specifications, right? So those details, you as a client don't need to know about it, but the manufacturer will have very solid set of specifications for how to properly install, right? And it is that, I guess, level of coordination between the vendor and the manufacturer that gets you the best quality. If the vendor cannot comfortably describe to you how many times they've showed up for training on the products that they're repping, right? You probably should ask them a few more questions. Maybe ask for a letter from the manufacturer that supports this particular vendor's qualifications and the particular installers, because a vendor will say, I have 15 people on my team, but only one is certified. Okay, that's a frequent occurrence. So again, make sure you do your due diligence.
Thank you, Ilya and Seth. Very, very, very important points. And I think we can close out the session there. First of all, I'll add, we plan to bring Jim Passage back. He spoke to us for a few minutes on film. He's from 3M, a manufacturer. Probably sometime after Passover, we'll do a special segment. We'll speak to us the whole time. We always try to bring in the experts. We're always learning. We're always improving. But in terms of the film specs, if you had an assessment done by an RSM, by someone from CSI, we include more throughout all sections, not just the film, but we include more specifications that you should consider. Refer back to that when you're designing what you're looking for. And we're, like Seth said, we're seeing it again and again that people use their grant funds for film, and let's just leave it at they didn't do a complete project. More than likely, if the manufacturer requires that it be anchored as part of the cost, they should be required to come back and fix it for you. I don't know. It depends who you worked with. But that being said, anchoring, super critical. The film specs, we can share with you the kind of standard language we put in our assessments, as well as if you have an assessment from us, you should be able to get it from there. But it's thinking the whole picture. You might have a great secure door, but if it's not locked, what have we accomplished? So let's think that whole picture and that whole puzzle. Thank you, Ilya and Seth and Bill and Adam, the whole team. We want to give a kind of summary. It's been a lot of material the last few weeks. In the next few weeks, we have a couple more topics, as well as some takeovers regarding the next round of funding from the Federal Nonprofit Security Grant Program. And then might take the week off of Passover, and we'll keep on going. So pleasure. Thank you to everybody. See you next week.
Thanks all. Take care.